Hi, I'm Mike Hutjens, Extension Dairy Specialist at the University of Illinois. Today's program will discuss avoiding the forage cliff and looking at some feeding alternatives. Certainly, one concern about forage alternatives certainly is going to be the lack of having alfalfa due to the factor of winter kill and also drought in southwestern parts of the United States and water restrictions in California. Remember, if we're going to restrict or lower the amount of alfalfa, we're going to change the types and levels of protein in the feeding program. So you and your nutritionists need to be sure we get these numbers right and balanced out. Be well aware alfalfa, because of its mineral content, has a natural buffering capability. We may have to add some more buffers to feeding programs depending on physical form. Finally, we know also that the alfalfa, based on its quality, will have different levels of lignin and its relationship to NDF. So certainly alfalfa is a somewhat unique forage in the feeding program, and if you're reducing it, be aware you're going to have to make some changes. Again, we're looking at what about quality of these legume grass forages. We'd like to see them over 150 RFQ for high-producing dairy cows, lower-producing cows 130 to 150, dry cows under 130, older heifers defined as breeding age heifers 110 to 130. You'll have to balance those out. One way to price this would be $1.60 per point of RFQ. So if you're purchasing 170 RFQ haylage equivalent, that'd be on a hay equivalent basis, 170 times $1.60, that'd be about $276 per ton of hay equivalent. So certainly you can see the value of RFQ versus the value in terms of dollars. Certainly, why is the RFQ so important? Because it reflects NDF digestibility. NDF digestibility gives us a little idea of how well the fiber is digested. This wonderful study done at Michigan State by Oba and Allen indicates that as we increase NDF digestibility, meaning a higher quality forages, we should see about 1/4 of a pound higher dry matter intakes, and high-producing cows will translate that into almost 0.47 or almost 1/2 pound more fat-corrected milk. That ends up at a feed efficiency about 1.8. So you can see why that NDF digestibility is so critical. This table comes from Pat Huffman at Wisconsin from the Dairyland Labs, just illustrating the range. And I think that's the thing to watch. Take a look at any of these forage inputs. Look at mixed hay, for example. An average 47 NDFD for 48 hours would be a typical number, but look at the range. 32 to 62, tremendous differences there. You come down to corn silage. Notice a much higher NDF digestibility in normal corn silage. And again, look at the range, 48 to 71. 71 probably reflects more of the brown midrib type corn silage out there. So be well aware forages are going to be quite variable this year. The next question will be, what about physically effective fiber? That's what we feed forages to keep the rumen healthy. These criteria simply have different ways to define them. 5 pounds of feed particle sizes over 3/4 of an inch and shorter than 2 inches. Why less than 2 inches? Feed separation and sorting can occur. Encouraging the cow to spend 550 to 600 minutes a day with chewing activity. That includes rumination and feed consumption. And of course, the new techniques out there, we can actually measure that on the farm right now with these new recording systems out there. Or if cows are at rest, 60 to 75% of the cows should be cud chewing at rest. And another index might be how many chews per bolus. And that means every time a bolus comes up, you count how many chews. If it gets below 50, then you may have fairly high quality forages not get the rumination response we want. The bottom line, we like to have the pH over 6. Beautiful set of data from Randy Shaver looking at what happens to kernel processing. Do we chop our forages correctly? This is corn silage. And just look at the number of samples here over a number of different years, several different labs listed up there. Excellent means you've did a perfect job. We're getting most of the starch broken down and available for the cow. And notice that number in the teens. The one at Cumberland Valley, really scary, 7%, whereas it was done an excellent job of chopping. So that's another take-home message. When we chop our forages, especially corn silage, do we get a good job of getting the right physical form on that crop? Why is that important? Again, Dr. Shaver extrapolated that data and said, if you do a poor job, you are leaving 2 pounds of milk on the table. If you do an excellent job, you'll be rewarded with 4 more pounds or 2 more pounds. Bottom line is, going from poor to excellent processing of corn silage is about 4 pounds more milk. Huge number. So these are Illinois guidelines. If we look at corn silage, we'd like to have around 10% in the top box, over 50% in the second box, and then depending if you have a 3 or 4 box system, less than 35% in the bottom 2 boxes. If you have that type of corn silage, you can see our TMRs and our haelages then correspondingly will give us the type of physical form we want. That's going to be awfully important if we're going to be short of alfalfa hay or other long hays in the diet. Certainly a topic of interest is shredlage. This is the new processor we have on the marketplace right now that's available primarily in the Midwest. Simply means that we're going to rip this forage longitudinally, really opening it up, allows us to chop at 1¼ inch theoretical length of chop, which is about 30 millimeters, which is almost twice the length of a kernel processor that we see out there in the field right now. It really opens up that plant, really crushes the kernels, and has a little different texture to the feed. If we look at the Wisconsin data, you can see what the shredlage does compared to KP, which stands for kernel processor. You can see over 70% in the second box. However, with the shredlage, you can see we spread it almost 50-50. So what you're doing is actually making this corn silage behave a little bit more like long hay or straw out there in the feeding program. That could be important when we were going to be minimizing some of our alfalfas and legumes this year. Another important point, we look at feed allocation, that is how much forages do we need. Our guideline is about 30 pounds of dry matter per cow. That includes a shrink value of 5 to 7%, and that's fairly low for the listeners at this point, which means we need about 5.5 tons of forage dry matter per cow per year. That includes the dry cow. Now, if you're raising replacement heifers, the thumb rule is add about 30% more. So if you're going to try to feed a cow and a replacement heifer for an entire year, starting in October, November, whenever your forage window stops, now you're going to have at least 7 tons there until the next harvest window opens up in the spring, fall, or in the growing season. So these are the strategies you can look at. We can look at raising more corn silage, even planting it here in July and August. You can look at buying Western hay. That price can be quite variable depending on inventory and availability. We could be adding straw. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Small grain forages such as the winter cereal grains or the fall harvested grains at this point, and the sorghum sudan grasses, which are annuals, of course. If we're going to use straw or corn stalks, here are some guidelines to remember. We say with milk cow rations, start out with 1/2 pound and monitor response. What do you mean by response? Milk production, dry matter intake, milk components, cud chewing. What are the cows telling you? We usually stop at a maximum of 2 pounds or 1 kilo per cow per day because of its high fill factor and slower rate of digestion and rate of passage. We like to have that process to 1 or 2 inches in length. In fact, if you use the Penn State box, a perfect world, 1/3 in the top box, 1/3 in the middle box, and 1/3 in the bottom 2 boxes at this point. And you almost always have to add water if you're adding dry straw or corn stalks to the diet because you have to, it softens them up and makes them more palatable. Dr. Drakely at Illinois indicates dry cows 1/3 of the total dry matter, or 8 or 10 pounds, 4 or 5 kilos of straw are possible. Older heifers up to as high as 40 to 45% of the dry matter could be these byproducts, depending if you're using corn silage or one of the wet byproduct feeds to complement that. Depends a little bit on that factor as well. Neat work coming out of the Midwest, Iowa, Nebraska, Illinois. You can treat corn stalks with calcium oxide, also known as quicklime, which increase digestibility by about 10 units. So you can take a fairly low quality forage and make it behave a little bit like a higher quality grass. Be well aware of soil contamination with corn stalks and mycotoxins risk in some of the straws, depending on how it was harvested and what exposure it had to weather conditions. Once we've got this forage growing, then the question is, can I preserve it? The point is that all silages should have a good research-based silage inoculant. The data from the Kansas state would say about a 3% improvement in dry matter recovery, which means you actually get 3% more feed that you have grown, preserved, and available for your dairy animals, and about a 2% increase in digestibility, which means we've fermented that feed faster, and therefore we have more digestible nutrients available for the animal. If we look at a cost of $1 to treat the silage, the benefit to cost ratio is 3 to 1, looking just at the nutrients and extra dry matter preserved. If you feed that to high producing cow, the Kansas people suggest about an $8 return for each $1 spent on inoculant, a very good investment. Another aspect is to take a look at avoiding surface loss, especially in our bunkers and piles. And of course, the oxygen barrier coverage products are very common and now available, highly recommended. We can reduce oxygen penetration greatly, especially in the top 1.5 to 3 feet, reducing dry matter losses by nearly 50% based on some Michigan State research here. Overall, that means another 2 to 5% savings in dry matter retained. Add that to your inoculant, and quickly you can see some very significant savings that you can look at with these products. Well, that's complete our program for today. Come visit us on our dairy courses, available on the website as listed above there, and come visit at DairyNet. Our thanks to Jim Baltz, our instructional design specialist, for putting this program together. Thanks. Have a great day.